Hey friends, welcome back to Survivopedia. My name is Jason Salyer, and let's take a moment to discuss simple small tarp / poncho shelters. In my personal opinion, if you do not have a poncho in your kit, you are wrong. There's no getting around it. It makes excellent rain gear. It makes an excellent one-man shelter. If you link two of them together with the snaps, it makes an excellent two-man shelter. You can collect rainwater in these things. You can use it as an improvised stretcher. All sorts of things. I've used it to transport earth. When you're digging a hole and you need to transport that earth from one place to another, I've used it for that, and it works really, really well. It's just too versatile, too useful to not keep in your pack. So get a good poncho. This one, before we get started, before you ask, is from Helicon Tex. We're going to do a simple lean-to type shelter, and we're going to connect one end of our ridge line to this tree and one end to this tree. When I'm selecting my trees that I'm going to be attaching my ridge line to, I want to make sure it's far enough apart. Obviously not too far where I have to use 100 feet of cordage, but not too close together where the ends of my tarp are going to contact the tree and then have a saggy ridge. We don't want that. So 1, 2, 3 big steps. If it meets that, then we're good to go. I keep my cordage like this in my pack. Keeps it organized and maintained so it doesn't end up being this giant big knot. And it works really well for me. And almost all my cordages like this, I keep a small little overhand knot in both ends. I also melt the paracord, but with that knot, you don't even have to really do that. And what that does for me is it just allows me to tie quick release loops, basically. Quick to untie loops. And the way that I do that, once I've got my knot there, is I basically make a loop here, like so. I take this portion, the tag end, I tuck it through, and then I pull it until that stop knot comes in contact with the other knot that I've created, and that gives me my loop that is pretty easily untied. If it gets really, really tight, it might be a little bit tricky, but for the most part, that is how it gets untied. So one more time, small loop, stick the end through, and just don't let this knot here, that stop knot, don't let that go all the way through like that, and you've got yourself a nice overhand, or nice easy to untie loop. Just next to that, I've got myself a prusik loop right here, and it stays permanently attached to this cordage. It's just a piece of cordage. Let's call that maybe a foot long, give or take, when it's all unfolded, when it's all stretched out. But I've just done a simple overhand knot on the end to make it into a loop like this. And then what I will do, it's easier when there's tension on this and you've got it strung between two trees, but what I will do is I will take this loop that I've created with this smaller cordage, and I'll wrap it around the main line once, twice, 3 times like that. And then if I pull on it, it does basically that. And then you can clean it up, dress it up a little bit. And what that does is it allows this knot, this prusik knot, it'll slide on this larger diameter cordage back and forth. But if you load it, if you put any weight, any tension at all on this end right here, it locks down. And that is really secure, and that doesn't want to go anywhere. Now what I'll do, I'll just leave this in my pack. Right? So I've got my loop here that's easily untied if I want it to, and I've got my prusik loop on my line, and this end is the one that I'll start with. I'll take this and I'll go around my tree like so, and then I'll take the remainder of the cordage and I'll run it through. And that's why I like to work with about 20-25 feet pieces of paracord, because anything longer, let's say you're working with a 50-foot section, I mean, I guess you might need it in some situations, but for the most part, you'll never need that much. If you needed more, you could always just link 2 pieces together. Got my loop here snugged up around the tree, like so. It's not gonna slip, it's not gonna move. And then I've got my prusik knot right here, my prusik loop, ready for action. And then, oh, by the way, this is about waist high, give or take. That's important. So about waist high, give or take, you can adjust that as needed, but for the most part, that's where I like to do it. And then I'll take this in and I'll come all the way over to my other tree, and I will wrap around that tree, and I'll show you how I tie this end. Now this is the part that's going to the other tree that we just looked at. I'm gonna make a small loop in this line. So I make a loop here, and then I take the part that's closest to the tree, and I come through, poke it through, and that gives me a small loop like this, which is also very easy to untie just by pulling both ends. That knot comes out. So one more time, I make a small loop like so, and then I take the end closest to the tree. That's really important. Make sure you don't do it on this side, because if you do, it will tighten up on itself and you'll never be able to untie it once you put some tension on there. So don't do that. Always use the end that's closest to the tree right here, not this side. I'll go through like that, pull it tight. That gives me a little bit of a loop right there, and that's all I need. And then what I'll do is I'll take the remainder of my line, the tag end, and I'll pull it through all the way. And this gives me something to leverage against and will allow me to get my ridge line really, really tight. Because I'm putting tons of tension and that tree is actually leaning towards me. And then, once I've got my ridge line banjo string tight, like it is right now, I can tie it off. So here's my loop that I tied to my main ridge line right here. And I've run my tag in through. I'm gonna pull really, really tight. Get lots of leverage on that, which is nice. You can really crank on it. And then I just pinch it with my fingers, like so. And then I'll take the rest of my tag end here. I'll lay it over the top. I'll lay it over top of that line, and I'll tuck just a little bit through, pull that tight, and that gives me that really easy to untie slip loop. Boom, and I can take the whole thing down and break my camp up. All right, pull it really tight, pinch, take this tag end, and I'm just trying to tuck a little bit through right there. Pull it tight, and that's all it takes to create a really, really tight ridge line that'll hold up your shelter. Don't buy ponchos without grommets. They need to have grommets on the corners, for sure. At least 4, one on each corner. And the ones in the middle are also helpful sometimes, but make sure they've got these grommets. Now what I'll do, I always rig up a piece of that little bank line, a bank line loop on each corner of the poncho, but you don't have to do that. It just makes it easier for staking it out sometimes. Through. I'll stick that through, and then I'll take any stick, doesn't matter, any stick off of the ground, and I'll stab it through that loop. I'll push it through there like so, and that is all it takes to hold one corner of your poncho. And then I could adjust this all the way over to this tree or all the way back over to the far tree, doesn't really matter. Then I'll take this end here, this other end that's also got a loop on it, and I'm going to use this loop that I've created on the other side, the far side of the tree, that I used to secure it. And I'm just going to pull on that. Don't want to untie it, but you want to get a little bit of slack in there, because I'm going to use this to secure the other end of my poncho. And once I have it stuck through the grommet of my poncho, I'm going to take any old stick up off the ground, doesn't matter. I'm going to stick it through there, and that is going to secure the other end. The great thing about this system is that it's really easy to adjust. I can adjust it on both ends by pulling on that tag end, or the easiest thing is just to tighten up this prusik loop, right? Because remember, I can slide this along the ridge line really easily just by pushing on it, and that takes the slack out of the middle of my poncho. Before we go any further, we want to do something about this giant big leaky hole in our poncho, right? Where your head goes through. That's not going to be very rain tight if you're using it as a shelter and not just wearing it. I want to pull the drawstring. All right, so I close up that hole and make it as small as possible. And then what I'll do is I'll give it a twist like that. So I'm going to secure it right here below that hole. You can see where the hole is, where my head would be. I'm going to secure it here. I'm going to fold it over like that. And then I'm going to take the drawstring and wrap it around my poncho like so. So much harder to film these things. It's much easier to do it from an angle where you can't see. But you get the idea. So I secured it below that hole, and then I'll just wrap once over my finger like that. And I'll stick the rest of the line through and pull it snug. And that should keep any rainwater out of my poncho. And I've used this method a lot. I've slept under ponchos a ton, and this works really, really well. No water's gonna get through there. I need 2 stakes. Any stick that's not completely rotten will work. Something about that size, maybe pinky size in diameter, is gonna be just fine. Where I live, the ground is pretty soft and doesn't require any carving. This is a tent stake, ready to rock just like that. Because these grommets will only allow a certain size stake to go through. I used to carry tent stakes with me, but I'd always lose them. I don't know what it is about tent stakes for some reason. That is the one piece of gear that I can never, ever keep track of. I don't know if it's leave them on the ground or drop them out of my pack. I don't know. But they seem to always be gone when I need them. So I just stopped carrying them in general because where I live, the ground is soft. And any old stick like this will get the job done. So what I'll do is I'll take that loop that I've already got pre-tied onto the corner of my poncho, and I'll just stake it out with that loop. I'll put some tension on my poncho so that line right there is nice and straight. And then I'll just jab it in the ground at about a 45-degree angle with the bottom of with the point of my stake going towards my ridge line, all right? And that will keep it from pulling out. If I just stick it straight in the ground like this, it's much more likely to get pulled out. So I'll put it at an angle towards my ridge line, I'll jab it in the ground like that, just temporarily right now because I'm probably gonna wanna adjust it. I'll come over to this other side and I'll do exactly the same thing. I'll just stake out this corner. Now that I've got this line relatively straight and this line relatively straight, just put some tension on that, stick it in the ground, and that will secure my shelter. And without any adjusting at all, it looks pretty much like that, like a simple lean-to type shelter that I could crawl underneath and be protected from some light rain, the dew that falls on you. The dew this time of year, this is spring, and then in summertime, the dew is really, really heavy. It might as well be raining on you. So something like this will be really good. Now, if it's a torrential downpour and you're expecting really high winds and heavy rains, this is not going to be adequate. You're going to get wet under something like this. All right, so with another piece of cordage, if I wanted to get myself a little bit more head space in my shelter, with another piece of cordage, I've got my little knot in the end. I'll make myself a loop, just like we did before. A quick release, jam knot kind of loop, like that. And this is what I'll use to secure to the hood of my poncho. I'll stick it in through that loop, and that will tighten up on itself and it won't come loose. By doing that around that knot that I created on my poncho hood, watch what happens to my shelter when I do that. Boom. It gives me a whole lot more room inside my shelter, and it's also going to want to shed the rainwater much, much better. Exact same knot system that truckers hitch. I'll tie it off to this tree behind me, or behind my shelter. Same system. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat. You don't have to do this stuff. You don't have to use the exact same knots. These are just ones that have worked good for me, and they're really easy to untie, and they're really adjustable, and that's why I like it. This one doesn't need much tension on it, just a little bit. Same knot, secure it off, and then with the rest of my cordage, I can just kind of coil it up like so, and tuck it in between those knots there. That will keep it kind of managed and up off of the ground. So what you see here is a very organized, very clean, very simple shelter to set up. Don't get overwhelmed with those knots. Once you learn them, it is a piece of cake and it happens in minutes. I can set this shelter up in, I would say, 2 minutes, maybe. And everything, it'll look just like it is right now in 2 minutes or less, I would imagine, if I was really in a hurry. And that is the beauty of it. If it's starting to come downpour and you just want to hang out for a little bit, this is a really, really nice shelter. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you hit the thumbs up, leave us a comment. Tell me what you think about this shelter. I know that there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. You can do a million different knots to secure a shelter like this, all sorts of configurations, and I'll probably actually do a series on this. I might show you lots of different ways to set up a poncho shelter or a tarp shelter. This is just one of them that really works. I've spent many nights under a poncho just like this, and just exact same configuration, and it works really well even when it's raining hard, as long as it doesn't get too windy. But in the summertime, it's nice and airy under here. The airflow can come in and dry me out a little bit. It's because it's going to be where I live in the south, and it's super high humidity. Everything's wet all the time, and if you get wet, you don't want to be confined inside of a tent. It just becomes extremely muggy and unbearable. So I find it much more comfortable to sleep under something like this. When the bugs get bad, obviously you're going to be exposed more than you would in a tent, but that's just the compromises, right? Anyway, I hope you really enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. Tell me what you think. Leave any comment, doesn't really matter. Tell me what your favorite color is because it really helps the videos out. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and we'll see you next time.